right, awesome. Okay, my name is Andrea Hood, and I'm so grateful to be here with other people of faith today. I believe that from the most difficult and painful experiences of our lives, we can grow compassion and wisdom and strength and something beautiful, especially if we have the right tools and the help of our higher power to help us. So I want to share with you my story of living with anxiety and depression and how I rose from some of my darkest times into the light. So my anxiety and depression came on gradually in my teens and 20s, and I was just always an emotionally sensitive person. For me, there wasn't some big triggering event. It's just kind of who I've always been. But when I gave birth to my two children, things changed and my symptoms increased each time I got pregnant exponentially. And so here's my family and some friends, my support system. And I am so grateful for these two little girls. When I was pregnant with Lily, my oldest, who's 5 right now, I actually started having more ruminating, kind of like sticky thoughts is what I call them. And more intense anxiety headaches. And then when I became pregnant with Malia, I was basically a mess. And it was a rough time in my life. And we all kind of know what these symptoms of anxiety and depression are, right? We've seen pharmaceutical commercials. We've been around long enough to kind of hear some of these. But I want to tell you a little bit about what it was like for me, because it manifests a little bit differently for everybody. So I cried a lot. I cried on my way to work sometimes in the car, and then I would get to work and just put on my makeup and, hope no one was the wiser, try to put a smile on my face, right? I cried enough that my little 2-year-old daughter, Lily, so this is around this time, right in the middle of my pregnancy when I was having the hardest time, my daughter Lily became really good at comforting me. She's such a sweet and empathetic kid, but it just broke my heart to feel like I should be comforting you. I am your mom, and here you are, trying to comfort me because I was just in a really tough place. And not only that, I just felt like an inadequate mother, friend, wife, and it got to the point where I started avoiding my friends who've always been a source of comfort and strength to me, but it just seemed like it took too much energy to put on that happy face and pretend like things were okay when things did not feel okay at all. And I didn't have specific thoughts about suicide at this time, but I really did feel like I just wished I could sleep. I wished I could escape my own head. My own head was not a pretty place to be at the time. And if I hadn't have been pregnant, I probably would have turned to some kind of substance to numb that out or try to escape because it was a painful place to be. And part of my anxiety is kind of these OCD type intrusive thoughts. And so I had these really cruel and relentless thoughts that my marriage was doomed and that I was unwanted by my friends and family. And anxiety and depression really can attack what's most important to us. And to me, that was my relationships. And I was terrified that these thoughts were true. And so it was really hard to ignore them, to have a healthy relationship to these thoughts. And this was really the hardest part about living with my anxiety and depression. And yes, I did have that kind of irritability, right? I was emotionally all over the place. I was less patient than I would normally be. And also, my symptoms, my headaches and physical symptoms really started to interfere with my work, and I love my work. So this was a hard time in my life, and a big part of the reason it was a hard time in my life is I knew I was going to have a baby soon. Like, it's not okay to fall apart when you're about to become a mom again, right? I had my Lily, who's my oldest daughter, and then Malia was going to be born soon, and I was like, okay, something's got to give. I have to find a way to get in a better place and be the best mom that I can be for them. And that motivation really pushed me forward. And so in an odd way, I'm really grateful that I went through that hard time because it helped me to try different solutions and resources that I might not have been open to. if things hadn't gotten that bad. And so it really was a blessing in my life in a way. So I was only willing during this time to try medications because I had 2 friends who told me their stories about how medications helped them. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a go. I show up at my doctor's office, and, the nurse asked me all the questions, like, are you feeling like killing yourself? And she can't even look me in the eye. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing and awkward. And I'm feeling all this internalized stigma. But there's part of me in my brain that's like, I work in mental health. If I can't go to the doctor and ask for help, and I, with all my education and my work in this field, who can, So I pushed through that, discomfort of feeling that stigma, and I'm so glad I did. At first, I was, just a whole bunch of side effects, right? I had to try 3 different medications before I found one that was helpful to me. But I remember, after finally finding a medication that was helpful to me, feeling that change in my mood and feeling just this overwhelming knowledge that my struggles with mental health were not my fault. They did not define me. And that just relief I got from the medication helped me understand, that I was so much more than what my pain and my anxious thoughts and, what I had made myself out to be during that time. And I knew that God wanted me to use that experience to have more compassion for others and to be a voice for others who were suffering, because there are many who are suffering with very real mental health conditions. And so for me, what helped was medication, exposure therapy to confront my intrusive thoughts, and EMDR, which, if you haven't heard of it, very interesting stuff. It's eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy, and for trauma. And for me, those treatments were miracles that changed my life for the better and helped me be a better mom and probably saved my marriage. And they helped me to kind of change the story I'd been telling myself about events that had happened to me, to have more forgiveness and more compassion for myself and for others who were involved in those events. And so I'm really humbled by the knowledge that there are so many who are still suffering, who haven't found the right treatments and the right things that work for them. And I'm grateful that I have found some things that have worked for me. When I'm mentally and physically well, what does that look like? Well, to me, that looks like, I still get negative thoughts, right? I'm a human. I still have times when my mental health goes up and down, but those negative thoughts feel less true and less sticky, less powerful, because I have, not the skills, but also just my biology has been kind of healed and changed. So I don't resonate on a biological level with the thoughts in the same way. So it's easier to separate myself from them. When I'm mentally healthy, I can be alone or, be mindful in the present moment and not feel like I'm having to hide from my own brain, my own thoughts. So when I do have these moments of darkness, of anxiety or depression that do come back, I'm really comforted in the knowledge that I am just experiencing, part of our shared human condition, right? There are many, many who are suffering. And that knowledge, that compassion that I feel for them and God's love that I feel for them helps me to have compassion for myself. And I do have hope with the tools that I found that, when things are tough, that it won't, that it'll be short-lived, that I'll find a way through, because I do have good tools and resources I was able to find. So I'm sharing my story with you today because we know from the research that sharing stories of recovery and help-seeking and healing is a really powerful way to change our culture around mental health, to normalize these things, to shine a light on something that maybe has, been kind of hidden in stigma or misunderstanding for too long. And it can really encourage others to seek help. Just like my friends' stories of trying medications and how that helped them how that impacted me and gave me the motivation to move forward. Maybe something I said today will resonate with one of you, or maybe in the future you'll be more open to seeking help because of it. So I have faith that if we use our resources and if we don't give up, that God heals us and He helps us find the right tools that we need to heal ourselves. So I'm excited again to be talking to you guys about sharing these stories of recovery and about how we communicate about suicide, because I think their faith communities are already doing such incredible things for suicide prevention and building protective factors in ways that nobody else can. So part of that is the resources of a faith community, right? You've got, if I'm going through a mental health crisis, I have access to someone I trust who I can talk to about it. I have access to someone who's going to minister to me or pray for me, and also maybe babysit my kids or bring me a meal, or even help me financially in a mental health crisis. And those kinds of resources are a gift. Also, the connections that a faith community can bring is so valuable. And so we need those connections. Everybody, every single one of us needs to feel like we belong to something greater than ourselves. We need that. And a faith community is so powerful in bringing that into a reality for us. It gives us opportunities to serve others, which helps us have perspective on our own problems and feel like we're part of something. And connection to our neighbor, that getting to know people around us and building those real relationships, but also connection to the divine. And then really faith communities help us with these protective beliefs that help prevent suicide. And so these beliefs about who I am outside of this moment, outside of this suffering, outside of this life even, who am I? That knowledge is powerful, and that can help us get through some really difficult things. We have a better understanding through our faith about the purpose of life, about life after death, about how we can find meaning and growth in our suffering. And we have a source of hope. Because for me, I believed even, when I was struggling, and I believe now that God is aware of us when we're suffering. He feels compassion for us, weeps with us, and has the power and the desire to heal us. So let's talk about how we can communicate about mental health and suicide in ways that empower our congregations and our faith communities to seek help, to change our culture, and to reduce some of that stigma and misunderstandings around mental health and suicide prevention. So what we say and how we say it can either increase risk of acting on suicidal thoughts for individuals who are already at risk. If they're already in a dark place, they are, more susceptible to this any type of communication we might share. And then, or it can promote help seeking and resiliency. So the ways we communicate, the stories we tell, the language we use is all powerful. And so if we're aware of that, then we can use that power for good to bring hope and to uplift. And this isn't just a nice idea. This is backed up by over 100 research studies showing real-world examples of how unsafe messaging actually increased rates of suicide, or how being exposed to a suicide loss actually can increase our own risk of suicide while we're going through that bereavement. And so this is very real, very much backed by research. We also, another application of this is that in any congregation we might be in, there's going to be people who have anxiety, depression, mental health conditions, who are in the room right now, struggling with thoughts of suicide, who've attempted suicide before, or lost someone. So just acknowledging that's the reality, right? That's part of our human condition, and that's very likely in the congregations we serve in. And there's also going to be people in every congregation who want to help, and maybe who don't know how to help, or who have misunderstandings about suicide or mental health. So if we can communicate to both of those audiences, then we can really do a great service in helping to change our culture. So to help us, we have a framework for successful messaging developed by the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. So anytime we're having a conversation, doing a social media post, planning a sermon, preparing for a funeral of someone who died by suicide, we can keep in mind these basic principles. First, we need to have a strategy. What do we want people to walk away with? Do we want them to walk away with exact resources of where to seek help? Do we want them to walk away with more hope than they had when they first entered the room? Those are two examples of like maybe a goal of our messaging. So we plan the goal, the strategy in advance, and then we want to focus on the positive, right? We want to build this narrative of hope and help seeking and where we can go for resources and these stories of recovery. And so focusing on those things can be very helpful. We want to use any guidelines that might apply, and this specifically we'll show you later. There's some funeral guidelines that might apply if you are, speaking or leading a service at a funeral for someone who died by suicide. And then we want to be aware to not share anything that's unsafe. Avoid sharing unsafe content. And before I describe what I mean by unsafe content, I want to just do a little mental exercise with us to help us realize how socially connected we all are and how so many of our decisions are socially influenced. So how many of you guys have read multiple reviews on Amazon before making even a minor purchase? I have. So sometimes we just want to get the best one out there. We want to, poll the masses. How many stars does it have? So we use these social things to help us make little decisions all the time, like what we eat for breakfast, what we purchase, is all socially influenced. How about somebody who's tried out a new diet, lifestyle, exercise plan because of a friend or someone that they trusted recommended it? Okay, yeah, a lot of us do that kind of stuff, right? This is very common. Let's think about maybe some bigger decisions. So if you can, think of when you chose, your career path, or when you were deciding whether or not to go to college. Did you have a role model, someone who you looked up to, who helped you make that decision or who influenced your decision, looking back on it? Yeah, I know I did, for sure. When you decided what faith community to be a part of, did you have some kind of model that influenced that decision? Yeah, I know I did. And, when you are thinking about what kind of parent you might want to be, or what kind of friend you might want to be, do you have a role model who might have influenced that decision? Yeah, absolutely. So many of our decisions are socially influenced, whether we realize it or not, and it turns out that can apply to suicide as well. So when we share, what we want to avoid doing is creating a role model for suicide. Rather, we want to have a role model for help seeking and recovery. Because that can be particularly dangerous for someone who's already at risk, who's already suffering and looking for a way to escape that suffering. So we want to avoid sharing methods of how someone might take their life or how someone attempted or did die by suicide. That information is not safe and not helpful. And we want to avoid glamorizing or romanticizing suicide. What does that even mean? Well, that's anytime we portray suicide as having positive consequences. So if we're talking about someone who died by suicide and we're trying to be comforting, maybe we would say something like, they're free now from their suffering, they're in a better place, they're, it's not that the intention behind that is wrong. It's not at all wrong. We're trying to be comforting. But on the other hand, how would that influence me if I'm a person who's really, really suffering and I can relate to the reasons why they took their life? And I'm like, yeah, I want to be free. I want to be in a better place. So we just have to be aware of how it could be perceived by someone who's at risk and be cautious with our communications in that way. We want to avoid portraying suicide as an acceptable or common response to adversity, because in fact it's not. Most people with thoughts of suicide don't die by suicide. They go on to recover and get help and get through their challenges. We want to avoid simplistic explanations like, oh, this person was bullied, so they died by suicide, or they, are an elderly widow who recently widowed, and that's the reason why, and we just kind of sum it up in one life event. Because what if I'm going through that one life event and I'm like, yeah, this is really painful and I want a way to kind of escape that pain. Again, we're just trying to avoid creating that role model for suicide. And so any personal details, if we share too much, can kind of build that like connection of, oh, this is what someone like me can do to escape their problems or their pain, right? So instead, what do we do? Instead, we can share safe, lived experiences from those who have overcome a suicidal crisis. And these are so powerful in changing our culture and building hope and encouraging help-seeking. And we can share information that it's okay to ask directly about suicide. It's okay to ask someone, are you thinking about suicide? And kind of correct some of those misperceptions that people commonly hold. We can share resources. 988 in particular is a free 24/7 resource that we all have access to give us advice and help us during a suicidal crisis or any crisis, any mental health related crisis. We want to share these warning signs because the more familiar we all are with these warning signs, the more likely we are to recognize them in the moment and to take action and help connect that person to help. So if we notice that they're talking about feeling like a burden to their family, they're just done, they can't take it anymore, those types of comments, even if they're jokes, we take them seriously and we ask directly about suicide. If they're having these behavior changes where they're acting recklessly, they're saying their goodbyes or withdrawing or, perhaps isolating from friends and family, those types of things, we want to be aware and take an immediate positive action to help connect them to resources. We also can share that seeking help is a sign of strength because it does take courage. And that you're not alone. There are millions of others who have experienced and can have empathy with what you're going through. It doesn't mean they went through the exact same thing, but sometimes our brains convince us that we're so alone that no one can relate, and that's not true. We're all part of the human family experiencing similar pains and weaknesses and struggles, and we are not alone. We have amazing treatment that works. And it might take time to find the right treatment, to find the right therapist, to find the right medication and self-help. But with that persistence, you can find the thing that works for you. And then sharing messages that recovery is the norm. That's good news, right? Most people who go through this, who have thoughts about ending their life, do not act on those thoughts. Most people get through it, get help, and live on. So I want us to think about, in a faith community, how do we apply these principles and message in ways that can positively change our culture? So we have opportunities when we're messaging from the pulpit, when we're counseling individuals one-on-one, when we are working with families or supporting our communities after a loss, or just in general, when we're trying to create a safe space, safe congregations, and safe communities. What can we do in each of those settings? So let's talk about from the pulpit first. There's been some great messages shared more recently in my faith community that more openly address mental health and that have meant a lot to me. And what we say from the pulpit really sets the tone, right? We have an ability as faith leaders and a responsibility to set the tone in a way that is going to be positive and going to help those who are suffering. So first, we got to acknowledge the reality. Mental health conditions are just as real as physical health conditions. The brain is a part of the body, and we can't ignore it, right? We have to take care of our mental health just like our physical health. And acknowledging that it impacts us. Those of us in this room, none of us are immune from the potential for developing a mental health condition in our lifetimes, or even the thoughts of suicide in our lifetimes, right? We don't know the future. So there's no us and them. It's just a shared human experience, right? We want to clearly communicate the theology of suicide in our faith community, whatever that is, because if people have outdated notions or inaccurate notions of what our theology around suicide is, they might be less willing to seek help. So we can remove that barrier by addressing it directly. Sorry, I went too far. Okay, so we want to be a witness of hope and a witness of the value of each soul and speak inclusively. And I've been trying to model that today just using this we language. This is not an us and them situation. This is our shared human experience. So use we when we talk about it. And then we want to model that warmth and empathy and compassion that we know that our higher power feels for those who are suffering. We want to model that and help people feel that for themselves, have that compassion for themselves. And then we can invite, normalize help seeking, and be vulnerable. I started out today sharing my story of my own mental health recovery. That's not something I talk about all the time with everyone, but I wanted to model I guess how I learned from my friends and how others can learn from my story, and how if we're all more open about what we're going through, it can help change the culture. So I invite you to consider doing the same, sharing your own struggles, sharing how you've overcome them, what's helped you. And if you don't have a specific story of mental health recovery or experiences with suicide, that's okay. You can also invite somebody to come speak to your congregation about this, who you know has had these experiences. And so if you do, we just want you to do that safely. So make sure they're in a safe place in their recovery. If they've attempted suicide or lost someone to suicide, then we want to make sure that they're at least a year out so that they have kind of had some time to heal and gain perspective on this before they share publicly. And I would prep them in advance, encourage them to share what was helpful, share with a hopeful tone, share resources. Sharing with a blaming or angry tone is not going to be very helpful or hope in promoting for those who attend. Share what recovery looks like for them, and then definitely avoid references to suicide methods, because that's something that's proven to cause harm. So you can kind of prep them in advance so that they know what's going to be the most helpful way to address your congregation. Okay, so let's move to counseling those at risk. So when we're counseling someone with thoughts of suicide, they probably have some really hard things in their life. Maybe some significant losses, maybe some problems with, the solution is not clear. We can't take away their pain. We can't solve their problems for them, but that's okay. Just being willing to walk alongside someone who is suffering can help alleviate some of that burden and give them hope to continue. And so we can just walk with them through that journey. And as we're doing that, it helps to understand a little bit of what motivates the desire for suicide. And so what the research tells us is that desire for suicide is almost always motivated by a desire to escape some kind of unbearable suffering, whether that's emotional, spiritual, mental, physical suffering, right? Just this urgent need to escape because it is too painful to continue on. And if we understand that, we can approach this situation with compassion and empathy and try to understand, where their suffering is coming from. Another thing we want to understand about suicide is that most people with thoughts of suicide are actually deeply ambivalent. Part of them wants to escape, to end their life, and another important, significant part of them wants to live and is connected to reasons for living, like maybe a sense of responsibility to others, maybe to their religious faith, maybe to just a connection to a family member or a pet. Maybe it's just a sense of hope. They still have just enough hope to keep them going, right? It could be vague or it could be a specific person or thing. And so if we understand that part of them wants to live, then we're empowered to help them tap into that part of themselves that wants to live, right? And so that helps me as someone who's trying to be the helper, because I have hope as the helper that there's a part of them that does want to live, right? And so we're going to find that part of them together. So we can ask directly about suicide. Are you thinking about ending your life? And then take time to listen to that story, because taking that time to listen helps take a lot of that pressure off, the urgency of the thoughts. It can help them feel heard and valued and connected. And maybe they've never had an opportunity to talk about these thoughts or why they're having these thoughts with anyone. Maybe they haven't had the chance to feel heard at all. And so this could be the first time that they're opening up. And that's why we don't want to immediately just be like, treat them like a hot potato. Quick, let's get you to crisis services before you burn my hand. Like, no, slow down, take time, and show them that you genuinely care about the pain that they're in and what they've been experiencing. And then you can connect them to resources. So I would suggest calling the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at that point together, because they can assess the level of risk over the phone. It's free, it's available 24/7, and then they can help you make a plan with resources and strategies to help keep that person safe. And then always a good idea to help remove access to lethal means, such as firearms or medications, while you're talking with this person. Say, is there anything in your house you've thought about using? Do you have a firearm? Who can hold on to that for you temporarily until things get better? And then follow up with them. This is not going to be the only time we talk about this, because suicidal thoughts do not just vanish overnight after one nice conversation. And so we want to check in. And if they need a new referral, we can provide that, and just be a listening ear as they need it. So it's helpful to share our love for them. It's helpful to be a witness of hope that things are going to get better. It's helpful to validate what they're going through. This must have been so painful. This sounds incredibly hard. Just that is like soothing to the soul when you need to hear that and somebody else says that back to you. That can be a really powerful tool to be validated. And it's also helpful to, again, help bring out those reasons for living. You said you wouldn't act on the thoughts because of XYZ, your beliefs, this person in your life, whatever reason it is. Tell me more about that. How has that been helping you get through? Okay, so we're going to move now to after a loss. How do we communicate about suicide safely and helpfully after a loss? And I'm going to only skim the surface here because we're going to have a great talk on this afternoon. So I'm just going to touch on a couple points of it. But I want you guys to know that suicide loss survivors are experiencing a really intense and complicated kind of grief. That they may have intense feelings of guilt, shame, anger, maybe even relief, or maybe despair and hopelessness. Now they're feeling like life is pointless, right? And they also need help and support. And so because of these, if we understand these intense feelings and common reactions to suicide loss, we can be better prepared to help in that situation. So one thing that is not commonly known is that after a suicide death, that community, that family is also at increased risk for suicide, partially because it's such a painful type of loss, and partially because what we talked about earlier, just that social influence that our environment can have on us. And so we need to be alert after a suicide death to others who might be kind of triggered by that event. And it's not always who you think, right? We immediately think of like the family, the significant other, the best friend, we're like, okay, we got to check in on these people. And yes, please do. But also, what about individuals who were just struggling with their own thoughts of suicide, and losing this person became a trigger for them? So it's not always who we think. It can be hard to know who's suffering, and that's why we want to share the warning signs of suicide and share mental health resources widely after a death, and kind of enlist members of our congregation to help take care of each other. So we also, after death, want to avoid what we talked about earlier, these ways we could unintentionally create a model for suicide, that we want to keep that in mind as we speak about the death, as we speak at the funeral, and things like that. So just revisit these. And a helpful tool for that is funeral guidelines for faith leaders that can be found at liveonutah.org. So you can check out our website there and use those tools as you need to. Okay, so lastly, we're going to talk about safe environments overall. And I love this scripture. Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. It reminds me that God cares so deeply about the most vulnerable among us, that he loves the poor, the children, those who are suffering, those who don't have social capital, social power, right? That they're precious to him. So I want us to keep that in mind as we talk about how to create safe environments for all. Keep in mind those who might be more vulnerable. So to create kind of this overall culture of mental wellness and help seeking, one thing that can help is to have suicide prevention trainings brought to you for your audiences, right? And so we have a network of suicide prevention trainers throughout the state who can come to you and can engage your congregation or your members of your clergy in these topics and help everyone be prepared to know the warning signs and know what to do. So you can request a training there, or you can email me after if that helps, and we can get you connected to someone. No, I'm not going to travel all across the state and do them for everyone because I have 2 children. That would be exhausting. So next, we want to help those who feel like they might not belong in our faith communities to feel accepted and welcomed. And there's a ton of reasons why people might feel like they don't belong in a faith community. It could just be because they're new and they haven't built social connections yet. It could be because they're recently divorced or recently widowed, or because they don't come all that often. Maybe they have an addiction or some other kind of like secret that they feel like separates them from the rest of the congregation. It could be a lot of things. But one group we're going to take a few minutes to talk particularly about right now, who have felt historically maybe not welcomed in some faith communities, would be LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender individuals. So we're going to talk just for a minute about them and about how to support them and make more welcoming environments for this group. So it's important to know that about half of LGBTQ youth seriously considered taking their own lives in the last year. And when you think about the amount of suffering you have to have and the amount of pain you have to be in that place, it just breaks my heart that about half of our LGBTQ youth are feeling that way. And that is especially true of our transgender youth. When we take the transgender youth out of the equation and we're just looking at lesbian, gay, bisexual, it's about 1 in 3, right? So still, they need our support, still not acceptable, but I just want to take a moment specifically to discuss transgender and gender diverse individuals. And we know that our communities and our families' behaviors around and towards these individuals can make a huge difference, for better or for worse, and really has a huge impact on outcomes. And there was some research done by the Family Acceptance Project that showed that LGBTQ youth who experienced highly rejecting behaviors had all of these higher risks, these much more likely to attempt suicide, to have high levels of depression, use illegal drugs, and contract a sexually transmitted infection. And I want to put out there that I don't think that these families were all trying to harm their youth. I think a lot of them were scared. A lot of them didn't know what to do. A lot of them didn't realize what certain behaviors could do and how they would impact the youth long term. And so I'm not trying to judge anyone here. But I do think that it's important that we learn from this. And so we know that the behaviors we show can make a big difference. I want to share some quotes with you that kind of give a more personal view of this, because this is like the data, right? So sometimes quotes and stories can make it just a little bit more personal view. And so there was some research done recently. It was actually in the last year by Dr. Ann Kirby and her colleagues at the University of Utah. And they brought in transgender adults and did several focus groups with them and asked them, about suicide risk and protective factors, and how we could do better suicide prevention work in the state of Utah. So these quotes are from those individuals. And I'm not going to share these quotes to blame any particular group or try to change anyone's theology. That is not the point at all. I just think their stories need to be heard, and it's a good opportunity to learn from their experience. So the first one is, something that hurt my mental health a lot and still kind of affects me to this day is that when I was 12, I was put into conversion therapy by my parents. So conversion therapy, if you guys are not aware, is a therapy that attempts to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. And since this used to be a more common practice, but there has been research recently that's kind of revealed how there's no evidence at this time, or not sufficient evidence, that it actually works to accomplish what it was trying to accomplish. And also that it's very likely to cause significant harm, significant distress, and increased thoughts of suicide. And so because of that, conversion therapy is currently banned in Utah and some other states. And it has been, I guess, officially called out by several professional organizations as, not being a practice that they support. So this individual expressed that this was something that was very harmful to them, and now we have this research that hopefully, now that we know better, we can do better and use different kinds of approaches. So the next quote: being in this situation where religion is my entire family's identity, they're so committed to it that they would choose that over me, and that really hurt. Trying to unpack all the learned self-hatred being raised in a religious community has been one of the hardest things I've ever done. There's a need for support for those who want to hold on to their religion but don't feel welcome at church. So, again, as we read these, just thinking about how a lot of these kids that grow up in religious communities realize they're gay or transgender when they're children or young adolescents. So they're definitely at a vulnerable and sensitive age. And I think that's one reason why this is such a painful experience for them. I don't think that we, could just throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, that's really sad. I don't feel like I can change my faith's theology, and it's really sad that it's impacting people, or, I don't think that we just kind of leave it at that. I think there's a lot that we can do to increase protective behaviors and to help these individuals feel their value and feel more accepted in our congregations. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about some strategies based off of Ann Kirby's research and the Family Acceptance Project research that I think are something we can all do to play a role. Okay, if it'll let me change it. Okay, so some behaviors that help. We can proactively welcome transgender and gender diverse people to church services and activities. So we can get to know them. We can invite them to participate, to play a specific role in our faith communities, and greet them and welcome them and show them that they are wanted in our faith congregations. We can listen and show love even if we feel uncomfortable. So there may be times when we don't understand where someone is coming from, or we don't understand how they fit in our theology, and that's okay. We can just be willing to walk alongside them, whether we understand or not, just because we genuinely love them and care for them. And we can listen to their perspectives and what it's like to walk in their shoes. We can model and expect that others treat them with respect, right? That seems like an obvious one, but it is important that if there is gossip or bullying or anything inappropriate, that we deal with it immediately and then model the respect and love and friendship that we want our congregation to show this individual. We can understand their gender identity is unlikely to change. Maybe I can't change my theology and I can't change this person's sexuality or gender orientation, and that's okay. We don't need to. We can walk forward alongside them and love them and meet them where they're at. We can explicitly affirm their value to our faith community and to their higher power. So their souls are incredibly precious. And they need to hear that. And they need to hear that we need their talents, their gifts, their voices as part of our faith community. And we can use their chosen name and pronouns to show respect and acceptance. And maybe that's a little hard for us to get used to if we've known this person before they transitioned or something. But we just practice, because that is a way of showing respect and acceptance. And so if we say the wrong thing, then we can correct ourselves and move on. So I love this last part, that how we treat our transgender or gender diverse congregant has a deep and lasting impact on their life. It not only affects their willingness to participate in a faith community, it can also affect their health and well-being overall. So we printed some of these out for you guys that are out there, and we're going to email them with you so that you can refer to them or share them with your congregation if that's something you're interested in doing. And I know that this can make a difference and help move us forward in a loving and accepting direction. So, interestingly, it's going to be the same strategies to welcome all members into our faith communities who might feel like they're on the fringes or like they don't belong, It's a lot of the same stuff. So we're going to focus on building relationships. When people feel seen and valued and needed, that's a huge protective factor, and that makes them want to keep coming back and participating in a relationship with us and with God. We can be willing to walk with them, even as they're going through things that are hard or uncomfortable. And we can expect others to treat them with respect. We can love them where they're at. It's not our job to change them. That's between them and God. So we can just love people where they are at right now. We can tell them they're needed and loved and be respectful of their differences. We don't need to agree, on all aspects to be kind and to welcome someone into our community. So I want you to consider just the incredibly impactful role you can play in a faith community as a faith leader. You've been really entrusted with a special responsibility. And so, consider how you will use that to help protect those who are vulnerable and to help create a culture of acceptance and love and mental wellness. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. I encourage you to think about writing one down today or right now. One thing you can do this week. So this week I could organize a mental health training, invite someone to come to my congregation and talk about some of these topics. This week, I could plan a sermon or a talk where I discuss the reality of mental health and what we can do about it. Or this week, I could invite someone who's lived through this to come speak to my congregation if I don't feel comfortable addressing it. Maybe this week I could plan some activities that build social connections for those in my congregation so that no one has to feel alone or on the fringes. How can we build those relationships and have, routines like walking groups or book clubs or, these routines that bring us together frequently? Or maybe this week I feel like I need to visit somebody who's grieving or who might feel like they're on the fringes or not, accepted or welcomed into my faith community. Maybe I'm feeling inspired to go visit them. So just think about one thing that is going to stand out for you and be your goal this week. I believe that God is the perfect source of love and compassion, and that He wants to guide our efforts. And I believe that He has both the power and the desire to heal us when we're suffering. And sometimes He heals us through leading us to the right person, the right place, the right treatment. So we can trust that He'll heal us in His way and His time. And may God be with you in your efforts to comfort and heal and love your congregations. Thank you.